Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 4 of Welcome to Successville. We're almost halfway through season 1 already, which feels wild to me because I feel like we're just getting started. As always, if you're listening on Spotify, if you tap on the album artwork, you'll be able to see the full video version of our conversation if you want, and that's also available on YouTube. This week, my wonderfully successful guest is Kevin Morosky. Kevin is a creative I followed for a long time, but I got to know him better in March of this year when our books came out just 1 week apart. Somehow, this episode is the first time that money comes up as part of the conversation around success, which I think is really interesting. One of the things that I love most about Kevin is his quiet confidence. He always seems so confident and in control at all times. And so it was a real treat, even just for me, to be able to talk to him about that self-assurance and where that comes from and how that feels to him. That's enough from me. Let me introduce you to my successful guest, and you can hear his thoughts about why success is a community sport. Hello, lovely listeners. It's me, your friend and host, Sophie Williams, and this is Welcome to Successville, the podcast where every week I speak to a different successful guest to ask what is success, how do you know when you've got it, and is it really all it's cracked up to be? This week, I'm thrilled to be joined by Kevin Morosky. Kevin Morosky is a Virgo, a creative, and a film auteur. Kevin's career began in film photography, with his work seeing him published in the likes of Dazed, ID, and Vogue, to name just a few. So basically, if you bought magazines in the early 2010s, you've seen Kevin's photos inside. Aware that Kevin was often brought into advertising projects as a diversity hire, with little say in the actual content that he was shooting, Kevin worked to get on the other side of the industry. He quickly became known for pursuing authentic, often humorous storytelling that felt inclusive and insightful, challenging the norms of the industries, not least because he directed his own work. As a film director, Kevin's portfolio spans both commercial and personal work. He's directed video on demand, social and TV advertising content for the likes of Samsung, O2, Vodafone and Lush. His 3-minute film, The Joy of Black Ad Break Takeover, was aired during prime time on Channel 4's Black to Front Day. His short films include the award-winning Spun and Bruce, which was featured on Channel 4's Random Act series, the self-financed More Time, and the NFTS with Disney Plus UK funded Gently, which has its world premiere at the BFI London Film Festival in 2023. Kevin currently has feature films in the development with the BBC, Belrinti Productions, Luti Media, alongside a television pilot produced by Home Team. His latest book, Black Women Always, was released on March 14th of 2024. Kevin, hello, and welcome to Successville.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so pleased to have you because when I set out my sights for who did I want to invite and have conversations with about success, you were genuinely at the top. I see your work on social so much, and I always think it's so amazing. And I think almost equally important, I think the way that you approach work, or the way that you seem to approach work from the outside, is also so refreshing and so human and honest. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
You're a hero of mine, by the way, just
Wow.
to let you know. No, I love everything that you do. I love listening to your voice. I love, and by that I mean, yes, tone, but also the way that you describe things, and how articulate you are.
I feel all flustered and all very happy to hear that. It's always it feels like a real success, really, to have someone who I respect say, "Oh, I think you're good." So, thank you. I always start by reading people's bios because it always helps to give an audience like an idea of who you are and what you're about and what you've worked on. But I also know that when you do events, when you do podcasts, when you do stuff like this, it can feel a little bit awkward for some people to have your bio read back to you. And for other people, it feels really validating, right? Like this proclamation of the things that you've worked on. So I want to start by asking, how does it feel to have your bio read back to you and to sit there while people talk about your list of achievements?
I think initially it did used to feel really awkward. It's like, oh no, that's not me, and like, let's get past I guess, the niceties of just talking about me. Who cares? But now I love it because I'm in the space of really feeling like at points I am not respected enough.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than dashing out that annoyance or that little nagging feeling at everyone else, it's like, well, do I respect myself enough? Is that the respect that's missing? And it's a theory that I'm testing. I don't have an answer for you, but what I do know is now that anytime there is space for me to be celebrated or just be acknowledged, I am fully present, or I try to be fully present. Doesn't mean there's not like a little bit of like, oh God, but I'm trying to test out that theory. But so yeah, currently it feels good, and I think it's really easy to also forget all of the things that um, you have done, and that's anyone in general. You kind of get lost in the source of social yourself. You think, oh well, I
Mm-hmm.
only did that film last month, for instance. And it's like, well, actually, that took you like 6 months to get to that point. How many
Mm-hmm.
rewrites, this, that, and the other, self-funding or getting funding while holding down this job and doing this and that. And there's a lot more that goes into it. So yeah, I feel really good and blessed now.
I'm really glad. And it's a really impressive bio. Like every time I thought, and this is going to maybe sound rude, but it's good. Every time I thought I'd got to the end, I was like, okay, here's a new line, something else amazing that you've achieved. And some people, I think, have a difficulty in crafting that bio, in knowing what to leave in and what to take out. Do you have any ethos that drives what makes it into the bio?
I think, if I'm really honest, it's down to my background or at least experience in advertising and
Mm-hmm.
understanding. And I have different bios as well,
Mm-hmm.
just to be really clear about that. So for the most part, that is the main bio, right? That talks about filmmaking, because that is my main passion. That is my focus and goal. But if I specifically am doing a talk, etc., that one reads slightly different. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think actually just crafting and having different versions that make sense for the situation also probably alleviates that awkwardness that I was talking about
Yeah.
before. But it's the way that you also want people to meet you after that bio is being read. And so I think the early ones used to be really short and sweet. I used to get in, get out. And now I'm like, actually, no, it can be longer because I really want you to understand who you were talking to and why. Said without ego, but why it's a privilege that we are talking, not specifically to you in this moment, to be clear,
Yeah.
but I mean for those talks and those other spaces.
Once we get going, we're going to talk more about your professional life and all of those achievements and those things that you have managed and made for yourself that we just read out in your bio. But I think it's always a really useful starting point to start at the beginning. And so I think for a lot of people, our first ideas, our first touch points, our first frameworks for success come from childhood. And it can be, did we get good grades? Did we win awards? Or it can also be like, what did we imagine for ourselves? What did we imagine success for adult Kevin would look like when you were young? Are you able to talk a little bit about what your relationship to success or your idea of success might have been as a young person?
I think like anyone kind of growing up, the idea of success is to do with like money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how much money you have and all of those things. And never, I don't think as a child was it made clear that the real thing that we should all be striving for is freedom. Freedom in
Mm.
creativity, freedom in who you want to love, freedom in where you want to live, how you want to live. Do you know what? I'm going to paint this front room pink today, and I'm going to paint the bathroom turquoise, whatever. Just that expression, freedom of
Mm-hmm.
expression, I guess. And I don't know if I really started to think about harnessing that until I got to around, I want to say 14 or 13, or maybe it was a little bit later. And that came about because I was asked to leave the school that I was in secondary school, and I had to go to another school. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that school at the time was the worst school in the UK, or voted, whatever.
Oh,
There
wow.
was a
Mm-hmm.
a
Like a league table,
they
maybe.
yeah. So it was the worst school. So then I had to go to a school in Purley, which was like very middle class, and some of the kids lived right next to the school, and some of them had swimming pools, and some of them had horses they would visit, like complete
Okay.
different. Like I'm from like dirty, said with love, South London. I know how to fight, put it that way. So I was then thrown into this world where these kids were not about that life. They cared about their grades, and they were just walking around with no concept of hustle, or I don't know, like I'm quite good at maths, and I'm good at maths because my mum would send me to the shop with £20, and these are all the things that I need, and you need to make it work. That's where my maths comes from, right? It was never ready in the classroom. It was like figuring, okay, but if I get this, that's da 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 da. And these kids, they had no concept of that type of life, and I was like, this is really interesting. And I would say that from that standpoint, really now then thinking about art and how I would create my art, and how many things are in the way of me creating art and being at peace and having peace to create, find that it's rubbish, put it down, leave it alone for a couple of months and come back. All of that stuff takes money.
Right, yeah.
And so now I start looking at money in a completely different way. It's not just a thing to fill up my bank account and show off with. It can be a means to kind of freedom, but also I don't want to get sucked into money in that way. So how do I do that? Now I have to start thinking about my worth, and what is my worth, and that is my reason for being in those spaces, to get the money, because my time is worth this amount. This is the exchange. So I think growing up, I didn't have the best time in education, specifically in primary. They were like absolutely wild and quite racist. And it's only recently, in having that conversation with my mum in the book, I thought all the while my mum was like really angry with me because of the reports that are coming home, and the discrepancy specifically in primary. And come to find out, talking to her all these years later, she was like, I was never angry at you. I knew what was going on. I could tell how like bright and smart you are. And just to give background on that, she would get work for me that was like a year or two above my station, and just test me with it and be like, try and do these at home with me. And I'd just be like, yep, done. And it was perfect and done. And so she'd go back in, unbeknownst to me, and be like, look at this work that he's doing. There's something in this classroom that is going on, but this is like, I want to say mid-90s or early 90s. We don't have the language back then. There wasn't the language or the communication or the channels, I would say, that we go through now to kind of raise concerns around what is affecting performance and all of those things. Or another example, a really simple way to say this is that I wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia until I was like early 30s.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And that's me like finding my creative partner, Tom. And I remember we were working on a pitch, and I was writing on the board whatever our idea was, and it was a whiteboard, black pen, no blue pen. And I made no mistakes. Everything was spelled correctly, everything was grammar. And Tom was like, this is all written. I just resided to the fact that like, I don't spell things correctly. It's fine. My intelligence lies in different places. And he clocked it. He was like, oh, this is all written correctly. He was like, have you ever been tested for dyslexia? And I was like, no. He was like, I think you should, because I think there's something going on here with it being a whiteboard, blah, 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 blah. So went and got tested. And we're like, yeah, how are you only getting tested now? And I'm just like, white supremacy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true, isn't it? It's the real answer.
Yeah. Because
And
there were
it's so
loads of kids around me in school who fully were able to go and get tested, all sorts. I vividly remember being like, the words are jumping around the page, that's not just something you hear in movies. I have a really bad time with names half the time as well, because I can see your name in my mind's eye because it's very vivid. But by the time it gets in my mouth, like it's all jumbled up. And I would explain this and say these things and just wasn't listened to. But to answer your question, sorry, I just went off on one.
It's really interesting.
I think, yeah, growing up, it was just initially about money because I was all consumed by capitalism. And then that culture shock for me from that particular first school to the second school, and people had homes in the countryside, and mum and dad had a car each,
Mm-hmm.
Really small things like that. Like they would leave school and like walk 5 minutes to get home. We had to get nearly 2 hour bus to get to that school. But
Wow.
my mum was determined to put us there because they had really, really good grades. So I think that kind of culture shock, I knew, I'd known about racism, obviously, but that was my first, I think, introduction to class and how class works and what freedoms different classes have. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. And I just don't think it's something that we talk about. I think so often when we talk about success and when we talk about where people end up, we have so many assumptions and we assume that people are all going to have the same kind of intelligence and that intelligence is going to be really easily recognized within school. And we don't talk about what it's like to not have that recognition or not have that support. And if you don't have that, you don't know you're missing it, I don't think. So, like, it's
Yes.
really interesting that you're creative partner was the person who was able to say, have you considered that this might be a thing? And
Yeah.
I think it sometimes does take those outside eyes. And when we're children, we rely on those other people to be those eyes for us. And one thing that I think is really interesting about you is I think that you have young people in your life who I think you try to be really intentional about what you model for them. And I wondered, do you think that you give them a different idea of success? Do you ever talk to them about what's possible for them in maybe ways that your teachers or people around you weren't able to do for you?
All the time. All the time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that I do that purely because it's the right thing to do, but it's also a form of self care, if I'm really honest, or at least that inner child that didn't get
Mm-hmm.
that. Like, I don't get me wrong, I was always taught that I could do anything that I wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
especially from my grandmother and grandfather and uncles, etc., and my mum. But I was really close to my grandmother. But that was in the realm via her point of view of her experience and coming over from Jamaica. And
Mm-hmm.
she couldn't read or write herself, but she still managed to kind of get jobs and make it work and do all of these
Mm-hmm.
things. And so her encouragement really came from the space of if I can do this, you can. But my encouragement to the kids in my life, as I refer to them as my kids. I mean, if you've got kids and you're my friend, those are my kids. Those are my kids too. And I encourage them in such a way because I can truly see how like their opportunities are limitless in a way um, beyond anything that I could possibly do. And I feel like even though they never met my grandmother, some of them, because some of them, yes, they're blood relations, and then others are just like, the co-founder of POC, Nana, has a little
Mm-hmm.
girl, and I'd be beefing with that little girl, but I'm very serious about her. She's so headstrong in the most beautiful way, but I don't tell her she's wrong for disagreeing with me. I have debates with her, and like, my idea is that in being able to like stand her own ground with me and describing what she needs in the moment. And this could be as simple as like what bedtime story is, but giving her space to have that option isn't always something I had as a kid, and it's something that I learned later on. So for me, with these kids in my life, I don't know, I feel like I'm passing on what my grandmother and everyone around me already did, but also just trying to push them that further and trying to get them there faster. Because the
Mm-hmm.
faster that this generation gets to a space of really owning who they are and who they want to be and all of these things, they're so much closer to getting to the real problems in the world and solving them in a new way. And those
Yeah.
new ways are so important because it's not even that the old ways are tried and tested and they just don't work. It's just that capitalism or whatever system you want to throw into the ring has learned from those old ways and put up barriers for those old ways. And some of them barriers, they don't last forever, but they slow you down. A really basic example of that is like some of these kids of mine are like just getting their first jobs. And I'm very quick to be like, cool, what is the pension? And how do you pay into, because pensions aren't for old people.
No, no.
Have you ever deep that? It's like, now if I deep it, if I'd have like started really looking after my pension, I could have retired right now,
Mm-hmm.
realistically. But I never cared about it. Or do you want to top up? Do you want to do? I just didn't care. And now I'm like, shit. So,
I I think this
yeah,
is so common for people in creative spaces as well. So, like you, my background is also in advertising. And like you, my mum came over as a child from Jamaica and has always had to figure out for herself what she could be and like how she could make some kind of success. But I think more importantly, how she could try to help her children to be successful in sort of
yeah,
all the ways that you're talking about. And I think it's not really the point of the podcast, but it's a thing I try to say to people as much as I can, as often as I can, especially creative people, get a pension because
100%.
the work that creative people do is really hard and so often unrecognized. And we don't need to be trying to fight these battles when we're 80. And I think it's what you're saying again about this lack of, and it's not quite how you expressed it, but this lack of cultural capital. Because I
Hmm.
guess I feel pretty comfortable in guessing actually that the kids near your school with their swimming pools and with their country houses have parents who understand these systems in ways that our parents didn't. And it's not that our parents didn't care about us enough, it's not that our parents didn't want the best for us, but what you have access to, that knowledge, is so different depending on your starting point. And that's why I think the
Yeah,
starting point conversation is so important.
yeah, 100%. Even with some of the kids, and they're like, I think I'm going to start this or do this. And it's like, cool, let's talk about taxes then, because I'm not ashamed to say that, like, when I started working for myself, like, what would I know about taxes, because that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
in my curriculum. Just all of these things, you're right, it's the access to that type of knowledge. I think those kids around me, their dads were accountants and
Mm-hmm.
were related to this or that, and like, financial literacy is what we're talking about, really and truly. And like,
Yeah.
I'm financially literate in a different way now just because I've had to be. But I think back then, prior to that culture clash, like I said, like, my financial literacy was dependent on how can I make this work, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to how do I invest in myself for the future and make sure I'm covered if this comes along, or blah 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 blah.
I really remember early in my career, like really not having a lot of money. Like when you start out in advertising can be very lucrative, but not at the very beginning.
Yes.
And I very strongly remember that I didn't have many thoughts about success, except I wanted to be able to walk around a supermarket and to get whatever I wanted without worrying that my card was going to be declined or having to
Yeah.
do like mental maths as I was going
Yeah.
around. That to
Yeah.
me was just like absolutely making it.
Me going into advertising, I just decided that I was going to do that and like pause photography for a minute, because I just felt like going into advertising was going to give me the skill set to understand what the fuck was going on in terms of like industry as a whole. So as a photographer, like, I'd get these briefs and I kind of was like, this doesn't make sense. But bearing in mind, I don't have the language of like insights, or the proposition is this, or blah 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 blah. I don't have any of that language, but
Mm-hmm.
innately I know the thing isn't making sense, and I also know this isn't connecting to the culture in the way that you think it is. I also
Mm-hmm.
know that I am ridiculously emotionally intelligent. Like, I know how to pick people apart and understand what's going on and why they do the things that they do. It's what makes me um, an excellent sassy gay. Like, it's the reason why I can read people to filth. It's
Absolutely.
part of that. It's like I can pick you apart in a second, da da da. But also, I can put that energy into a skill set. So I went into advertising based on that. But I say all of that to say that, yeah, at that point in time, a day rate as a photographer just back then was probably between 15 to £2,000 a day, and I was never greedy with that. I make a point of not to chase money. So I knew that if I could work at least twice in a month, that was enough to like fill my fridge, pay my bills, etc. When I went into advertising, I didn't even have an advertising job at first. It was an in-house editor, and all they could pay me at that time was 100, £120 a day.
I think heavy air quotes around could, or they could pay you, or they
Yes,
would pay
yes.
you.
Because as you get senior, you realize that you're looking at budgets and you're like, wait, so to the client, you've booked me out at £750 a day. Although I should just, to be clear, there's a big difference between when I was an editor to like senior creative, but nonetheless, like that's what they could pay me. You're completely right. And so I had to really go back to budgeting and like riding into work. And it's a demoralizing space as well, because at that point, when you first get in, there's not that much money in your pocket. But then here I am working on the £2.5 million campaign for Samsung.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I'm spaghetti for the fifth time in a row, but like, yay, I got my £1 million campaign out, I guess. Like, it's wild. I'm now giving contracts and those jobs out to creatives who
Mm-hmm.
I probably could do this better myself, but I'm now giving them out to other people while I'm still being paid pennies. That's really where my social justice and community and things like that like to really come into fruition. And if I've got a black creative and a white creative, you're both being paid the same. And I'm finna to tell you both that, like, I'm going to cause trouble, but I'm going to let you know that she's being paid this and he's being paid that. So this is what you should be asking for. I've been Olivia Pope
Absolutely.
for the longest time, by the way.
I mean, absolutely the same. And I think it's what I'd like to say a lot of black people when they get senior in that sort of industry, but I don't necessarily think that's true. But it's also what I did when I became senior in that industry. I used to say to people, you are massively undercharging. And especially when I used to work at Netflix, people would be like overwhelmed by the opportunity. And so they'd either really lowball us or say, no, I'll absolutely do it for free because they want that logo on their portfolio. And I understand why that feels like a cultural marker of success, but also it's not success, I don't think, to be doing work for no money
Mm-hmm.
for a multi-billion-pound business. I think a lot of success comes from knowing what you're worth and standing in that truth. And that's
Yeah.
something I really want to talk to you about. But before we get to that stage, you've done something that so many people have on their bucket list of success. And actually, you've done several things that lots of people have on their bucket lists of success. But the thing that I want to talk to you about first is that you are the author of two books, one that you self-published and one that came out with a really, really huge UK publisher. And that is on so many people's ambition list, being an author, being able to say that, having that next to your name. And I wanted to talk to you about that process of writing a book and if you had any specific aims for success around that and how that all felt.
The first book, which was self-published, felt like pure freedom, did it myself. And it also felt like I made the right decision to do what I did with advertising and pick up skill sets. And what I mean by
Mm-hmm.
that is when I decided to self-publish, because I had offers of publishing and they were all trying to gear me towards making a part two to Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race, or
Mm-hmm.
even like your book was brought up a couple of times as well. And I was like, well, that conversation is already happening. What is the
Mm-hmm.
next? My thing is always like, what is the next thing we are doing? That's where my art and that's where my work should live. I should be living in the now and absorbing, but my work is always for the future. Anyway, that went round and round, and I was like, oh no, I just want to write this book of like black queer poetry of the now, and it's poetry slash kind of like rap lyrics slash long ass cut and paste prose. That's what I want to do, and they just weren't having it, and I was like, I'll just do this myself. And so when I say advertising helped is because I was like, I'll just design what I want and like think about how I'm going to market this and what it should look like and feel like. And I have a bag of friends from advertising from different agencies who I love dearly and they all do different things. So I have too many producers on speed dial to be like, can you
Mm-hmm.
help me cost this? And I have too many designers who are like, yeah, I can do that if you just send it now. So I just kind of like was like, I can do this. And that was a lovely time. Like I paid everyone out of my own pocket. I wasn't worried about getting that money back. And I learned about how difficult it is for an independent publisher to kind of get their books just as simply in Waterstone, and how many hoops you have to jump through. So we get to the second book, and the second book is an easy negotiation because I've done it by myself. So now the conversation is, rather than you come to save me as a publisher, what can you do for me as a partner? Again, because of advertising, I look at contracts in a completely different way. I go through my contract. I already have a lawyer friend. We go through, we find different clauses. There was a clause in there, which I think is common in most publishing contracts, about the front cover, and that they would send you two versions to pick from. And I was like, no, but I'm not a crackhead, so that's not going to happen. I'm also an art director. Like, no.
Yeah.
So we took that out and was like, it will be a stalemate, and we'll both have to agree on what that front cover looks like. I stipulated that Tom was going to be my editor, that Abby was going to be the designer. I made it so that Tom and Abby were hired as freelancers from the publisher as opposed to using the in-house, because it's like, you have the budget anyway, because I asked for the budget breakdown, but I can look at those things and understand what's going on. But all of this comes from advertising. I think the hard time I've had with this publisher, not all of them, I say there were like great members of staff there who in a heartbeat I would love to work with again, because they really cared about the project, fought for the name, they fought for the front cover. Actually, let me just say big up Laura and Stephanie. But as a whole, you know, there were bouts of depression around how that book was treated or maybe wasn't treated. I'll give you an example. It's coming out in March. My advertising hat is on. What is the out of home going to look like for that? And just for anyone listening unaware, I'm just talking about billboards, digital billboards or printed billboards. And they're like, yeah, we'll get round to that. And I remember meeting a girl who was meant to be doing the PR. And I went into that meeting with my own deck, and I had like a 15-page deck with ideas. You could do this, we could do this. So I had loads of ideas around that. Met that girl. There was loads of things she was meant to do. And like a week or two passed and like nothing had been done. So then very quickly, I just hired my own PR girlie, because I was just like, I don't have time for this. Because also what people don't understand with Black Women Always, that is a very, very big title, a very big, serious title that I didn't use for shits and giggles or just to get columns. Like, I mean what I say, and I'm very serious about the subject matter and the women involved and Black women in general. So that was the first thing, hire my own PR. I remember at the time, as I said, talking about out of home, they're like, oh, we can get to it. I was like, no, we need to do it now, because buying media, you can't, buy media isn't Deliveroo. Like, I can't just order media a week before and then it's up.
Yeah.
We need to be buying media now. And I remember going off to my contacts again and just being like, I'm just going to buy my own space. I don't have time for this. And then they were like, no, we got it. Anyway, cut to the book coming out. Because they dropped the ball, did the out of home space not happen a month after the book came out? And it's really difficult because I've seen other specifically white authors, white straight authors, release on, you know, I didn't say the label, am I a rapper? On the same roster and get all the shout outs and all of the things. And none of that stuff, not even a fraction of that stuff was gifted to me. If you look at all of the press I got around that book, it's because I invested my own money in my PR to find those opportunities for people to speak to me about the book. Even now, the book comes out in US in September. And
Amazing.
yeah, and they're trying to do stuff, but like it's very half-heartedly, like it's just it's not the one. And so now it's me directly talking to a Barnes and Nobles being like, hey, this book comes out, like, do you think we could do a thing? It's me talking to wherever, trying to figure something out to do, just to be there, just to show up for my book, my baby. All of that to say that it's really lovely to have a book in the store and walk in and have that feeling, especially if it's in the right section and that bookstore hasn't just pushed it to the back section with all the other Black books by Waterstones. But it is a wonderful feeling, but also you can't help but feel really left to the wayside, you know? And if I can get really real for a second, the conversation of like the next book, for instance, is based on how well this book sold and how well it's been received and people know about it. But it's like, but you lot did absolutely nothing to promote that book. So I'm being judged on your failures because my book bangs. Like, I know it bangs. I've done the due
Yeah.
diligence. I've done the work on it. I think there will be a thing where like it just goes crazy out of nowhere for no reason. It will be fine, right? But in this moment of me, because the next book I would like to do is fully with like black men and harder conversations. But the conversation around that will be, we only got this amount of press, and it's like you didn't actually get any press. That was like all of me. I basically took my advance and put it back into the book because I could see nothing was going to happen without me doing so. Does that answer your question?
It absolutely answers my question, and it gives me so much that I want to yes and onto as well, because I feel like we do have this sort of cultural imagination that writing a book is this North Star for so many people. And I don't know about you, but when I had my first book come out, people came out of the woodworks, and I was getting all these messages from people
100%.
being like, I've been working on this and this is my dream, and like people who I had no idea. And I've always tried to help them, but I always also try to be really honest about my experience. And my experience was very similar to yours, of lots and lots of letdowns and lots of disappointments. And I was talking to my literary agent about this. And so if people don't know, your literary agent is a person who deals with book deals and contracts and negotiations, whereas a talent agent might deal with sort of
Yeah.
your social media. And my literary agent was saying that people who have an advertising background always find books the hardest because we're used to knowing how to make things work. And I think, and
Yeah.
I've said it before on this podcast, that publishers, I think, live in this very legacy space of expecting you to feel grateful to be allowed into this space,
Yes.
expecting you to feel grateful to be allowed to tell your story. And I think that means that they don't necessarily do what somebody with our background would think of as the minimum of the work to get that
Yes.
out. And
Yes.
it becomes
Very
really
that.
difficult.
The other thing that kills me in that situation is I think about people without our background in those situations being fucked over, and that also equally boils my blood. I could actually cry about it. I don't like bullies, and I don't like people being taken advantage of. I hate it. I never think to myself like, oh, well, at least I'm okay because I can defend myself. You run circles around people who have poured their life and soul into these books. They see it as their one and one time only opportunity to try and break through, make a change in whatever way. And you just take it for kind of puppy shows. Sometimes I'm like, is the publishing industry some kind of like tax haven Ponzi scheme? Because sometimes it's just like, do you not even want to turn a profit and get your money back? I don't understand what's going on here. I really don't.
Absolutely. I think we're both speaking as Black authors who
Mm-hmm.
have published after 2020. And I think it was a different
Yes.
conversation historically, because I think the conversation historically for Black people was no one is publishing us, no one is telling our stories, no one is giving us the respect for the work that we've done that the work deserves. People were really struggling. And I think now it's potentially easier than it was historically. And that's not to say easy overall, but easier to have those conversations with publishers as Black people who want to talk about Black things. But then I think publishing hasn't moved on from that idea of, oh, we've got you in now, you should be massively grateful to us for that. And I did what you did. I brought in a lot of my own team. I brought in my own designer. I also had a meeting that was like, what is the out of home, what billboards are you doing? And they were like, we're not doing any. And I was like, fine, I'm doing that then. And
Yep.
like, we have to, I think, have this strength and this knowledge. We have to already come with all of the skills that it takes to do all of those different jobs just to be taken seriously. And I feel that in some ways during that process, I did get to a stage where I was taken seriously. But I think in other ways, I got to a stage where they just got really fucked off with me.
Yeah,
They got
yeah, yeah.
to a stage where they were
100%.
like, her again, what's the problem now?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There were days where I was literally spitting acid via email, like I was wiling out because the weight of my community is on my shoulders. We cannot predict what the sales are going to be and whatnot. But also, it's not about the sales. I'm literally here just talking about, show me that you care about this thing, because why did you commission it in the first place? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, and you're right. So The Glass Cliff is my third book. When I was
Hmm.
proposing it, they obviously went back and they looked at the performance of my first two books, and they were like,
Right.
well, why hasn't it sold more? And I was like, I wrote a really good book and that was my job. And that to me is
Yes.
the success of that.
Yes.
The sales. So I sometimes talk about it in terms of a project versus a product. And I think an
Yeah.
author's job should be the project of writing. And then turning
Yes.
that into a product of a saleable book is not really your job, or not really something that you can control. And we have a little bit more power in that as people who understand advertising. But on the whole, that's not our job. It's really difficult when we do have the future of the things that we want to do that feel like successes to us are then limited or questioned or made more difficult by the work of other people. One thing that I wanted to make sure to talk to you about, because I see it, I think, more strongly in you than I've seen in anyone, except maybe Charlie Craggs, who I'm also going to have a conversation with
I love her.
in this podcast series. She's incredible, isn't she? Is I feel like you have this real self assurance. I feel that your public persona, at least, is of someone who is very confident, of someone who is very, very talented and knows that they're talented. And it feels to me that that sort of knowledge and that sort of grounding in your talent, in your creativity, allows you to maybe say no to things that you don't think will serve you, and allows you to walk away from things when it's not either what it should be or just not being done in the way that it should be. So I wondered, do you feel like a self assured person? Yeah, how does it feel, I guess, to say, that doesn't serve me, so I'm not going to do it, or I'm not going to do it now, or on those
It,
terms?
it feels like a really big, warm hug, which sounds really cheesy, but just a hug to myself, and it's the best feeling. I truly believe in manifestation. Not only truly believe, actually, I practice it. I have seen that everything that I've ever wanted or manifested has shown up in my lap in a way that I had asked for it, just in time, out delay, um, every single time. And because of that experience, because of things coming with ease, with love, and with comfort, um, it actually just allows me to be a lot calmer and trust in myself. And so I think definitely it can read as being like confident, until the right problematic person, arrogant and cocky, but far from it. Because I'm a Jamaican at heart, which really means you can literally have my bed if you need it and my last coins. Like, I'm Jamaican through and through. Like, I love to help. I don't want to see anyone suffer. We are community, and plus I'm from South London, so like it's just a doubling up of that thing. But yeah, I think it just comes from the confirmed experience I have had of asking and believing in a thing happening, and that is all via me. So how could I not believe in myself and trust in myself? I know my grandparents, or knew my grandparents, and they were the kindest, loveliest people. And for all the things that they didn't have, it always showed up for them because they were always kind and always open. And I saw that, and experienced that, remember that, and I love that. So all of those things still live in me. And if those things all live in me, and my grandparents are, the loves of my life, and they live in me, I can't honor them and not honor me. I can't protect them and not protect me. It's the center of me. That's where it kind of comes from. The confidence comes from. It's like it's from a space of like, I've got me. I know that I've got me. And that took time. Do not get me wrong. It took time to like really like love myself and respect myself. But yeah, that's where it really comes from.
I think it's such an important part of who I think you are. And, who I think you are doesn't matter. But I, I see it and I admire it. And I think it's incredibly brave and I think it's incredibly successful to know that what you have is important, to know that what you have is valuable and deserves to be protected. And that sometimes the way you best protect that is to say, I'm just not getting involved in what you're doing
Yeah.
anymore. Sorry.
Part of it is also being a Virgo and being stubborn and just like, like that saying of like, oh, cut off your nose to spite my face. And it's just like, cool. Then I have no nose because this isn't worth it. Like the exchange of my principles just to get that win isn't worth it. And I believe in karma and not the childish karma of like, you do bad to me and then magically you're going to drop down the stairs. I just mean an adult version of karma where the energy just moves around. And I move with the energy. If I go into a room and I can feel that I'm not meant to be there, I do not fight that. I'm like, I'm not meant to be here. I truly just believe in being where I am meant to be. There doesn't even need to be a fuss or a fight about it. I'm just like, oh, do you know what? This isn't for me. And because of that goodness that sometimes only I'm aware of, there is no way that I can't stand for myself and protect myself in that way.
It's so
Yeah.
important and I respect it so much. When you manifest something, when you put it into the universe and you say you want it, are you good at celebrating it when it comes through?
Yeah, I am. I'm very good at it now, and I think that's because I've started to redefine what I think success is. One of my biggest dreams is to win an Oscar, just so I could call Boris Johnson a batty hole on that stage. I kid you not, and shout out South London and all the amazing Virgos. And I don't mind winning an Oscar or not, but now my dream for film is to make a film as good as Past Lives. I watched that film and I forgot to breathe halfway through that film and all the way through the film because it's breathtakingly beautiful. It's beautifully written. The execution of the thing is wonderful. And I was like, shit, if I can just, that is my goal. I just want to make something as beautiful as that lives in people's memories in a way where they are transformed and the way they look at love and the interaction of love and all of these things. My other goals have been to travel to certain places. People talk about gap years and being able to go off and travel for a while. I was poor. I didn't have time for that. And then by the time I started working and doing all of these things, it's only in the past 4 or 5 years that I've been able to be like, cool, I'm going to Japan. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that and live and experience. I practice this thing called on and off years. So I'll have an on year, which is the outpouring of projects. And then the off year is you already see me kind of disappear, and this is really an off year. So what I mean by that is I'll travel to different places and just experience people, the thing, and not have an idea of what I'm going to do with that information. I'm just soaking up. And then when I get to January of 2025, I'm like, cool, what have you learned? And that's when you'll see the explosion of work and ideas and all of these things. I mention that just to say that the way that I celebrate those successes as well is really trying to be in the moment of those successes. And those successes to me, or success to me, is being free to be like, right, we're going to go to the lakes for 2 weeks now, and I'm able to be there and not worry about anything. Or like you said, some people might hear that and it will go over their head. But the idea of going to the supermarket and not doing maths and buying everything that I want and not worrying about it is, I'm rich beyond my wildest dreams. And so those are the successes. And then bigger things kind of come along and they're great. But, when I moan, I guess, about the book and the lack of support from publisher, or also the lack of support in some respects to community, I'm not saying that I'm complaining about not having a number one bestseller with that book. I'm just talking about I expected a lot more in-depth conversations than I have had. And I've had like loads, in the thousands now, I would say. Like every day there's like, I just found your book. I just found your book. And And that is a goal, right?
Mm.
I don't know, with the book, I really wanted to shift something in culture. But also, I'm aware that I'm the type of person that, again, because I've designed my work that way, I'm always a year or two ahead. More time, what I hear is like, oh, this is what Kevin was talking about a year or two ago. That's all I hear. I'm always like a reference point. I'm always the thing. And the moment that I can get to realizing and being very, very comfortable with my position and where I stand, that's my current goal. But I'm also aware that that is life in general.
Yeah.
There's not no magical point in life where you get to this and then everything's magical and perfect. That is a lie. It doesn't exist. That is not the flow. Even if you just take the ocean as an example, just think of life as like, where does it start? Where does it end? And that is life in general. So I'm not saying it's an easy thing to keep your eye on or an easy thing to maintain and be like, oh, I'm just going with the flow. Like, it's not always easy because sometimes you're tired. Sometimes, like,
Yeah.
that tide has come along and you're like, I'm tired. So yeah, for me, success has really now molded itself into these small moments that no one else might not even notice. It's me putting a film together a little bit quicker than I did last time. It's me remembering the mistake that I made on set 4 years ago with that angle and how much I hated it in the editing room and being like, actually, do you know what? Let's just change the frame rate to 33.5 because blah, 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 blah. Because I learned that last time. And nobody, absolutely no one will know any of these things. How could they? But I'm so proud of myself in those moments. I'm like, I killed it.
I love that, and I think it's so wise and something that I really struggle with. And I think that's why I've started this podcast, because I always thought I could get to a certain thing or achieve a certain thing or get to a certain level and be like, I've done it, I'm successful. And I kept ticking off all these things and I just couldn't figure out why I didn't feel better, why I didn't feel more successful. I never felt, oh, look at this great thing I've done. I just kept thinking, well, what do I have to do next? And what I have to
Mm,
do next has to be better and bigger and all of these things. And I think this is why I think I'm trying to have conversations with people like you. As much as it's for the listener, it's for me. I'm trying to sort of figure out how to feel
100%.
success. Which brings
100%.
us nicely to my final question before the quickfire, which is, Kevin Morosky, do you think of yourself as a successful person?
Yes, I have to
Good.
say yes because the universe is listening. But yeah, I do think of myself as a successful person. And that's success in many a different ways. It's not about what's in my bank account. It's about the amount of people that rely on me, the amount of people that I can rely on, the amount of people that talk about me with a smile across their face and they can't help it. I think I'm successful in those elements for sure.
I think you are someone who people say nice things about behind your back. And that feels
Yes,
like a success to me.
yes.
So we're going to wrap up, as we always do, with the quick fire round. I'm going to answer the first question with you, and then I'm just going to leave the rest for you to do alone.
Okay.
So, quick fire round. What is a secret success of yours? What's something that you've done that you're proud of that won't ever make it onto your bio or onto your CV? So for me, I have a partner and a home life that I'm really happy with. And I feel secure in a way that I didn't see modeled growing up. And that feels like a nice success for me, but it's never going to make it onto my CV.
I think that earlier I had said that I have been the UK's Olivia Pope for the longest time and no one knows it. And I say that because some of the biggest collaborations, near misses, and step ups have happened because of my counsel or putting the right people in the room together who had never met to be like, you two should work together and this and that, and the third. But none of those things will ever go on my CV. They're not quantifiable. It does make sense to why I'm connected to people with notoriety in that way. And it's not like going to parties or anything like that. It's because actually I connected them and I'm really proud of that. And no one ever needs to know those deals. I'm just like, I helped and I helped silently because I loved you and I do still love you, you know?
Amazing. And it leads us really nicely to my next question, in fact, which is, when you think about success, how much do you think about community?
If community isn't involved in my success, then I haven't been successful. If I can't share everything that I'm doing, and if it doesn't open doors, and if it doesn't inspire the next to do more than I did in a quicker fashion, specifically within Black, brown, queer community, I haven't been successful. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah.
It's the top of the list, actually.
And then my final question is, where and when do you feel the most successful?
I think on not random weekends, but when I've left it too long and I'm able to say to my other half, I need to find an ocean. And we take the car and we pick a random seaside and I just go and sit in front of the sea. That is such freedom to just be like, this is what we're doing this weekend or this midweek or whatever, to just go and find sea because I need that type of therapy. And that's successful to me, that I have the freedom to do that. That's a whole holiday to some people, and I don't take that for granted.
I've really loved our conversation. Kevin, thank you so much for stopping by Successful. I think you're a permanent resident, and it's been great to have this conversation with you. I've really enjoyed and appreciated it. For our listeners, if they want to keep up with you, if they want to learn more about your work or celebrate your successes in real time, where should they look out for you?
Just Google me at Kevin Morosky on most places. I'm not on Twitter because it's owned by that madman, but you can find me on Instagram for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. That was the wonderful Kevin Morosky, and that's the end of this episode of Welcome to Successville. Thank you so much for listening and for coming on this journey with me. I'm putting links to Kevin's newest book, Black Women Always, and to Kevin's Instagram, which is one of my favourite follows, in the show notes if you want to spend more time with him. Also in the show notes is a link to the transcript of this episode because Spotify won't let me have them by default yet, but you know we love inclusion. If you want to spend more time with me as well, you can find me on Instagram at Sophie Williams Official. And that's also where you can send me a voice note if you'd like to share your own thoughts or feelings about success, or if you just want to celebrate a win. I'm going to get started on season 2 soon, and this way you can also be part of it. If email is more your thing, you can also email me on welcometosuccessville@gmail.com. So that's a voice note to @Sophie Williams Official on Instagram or to welcometosuccessville@gmail.com if you don't want to worry about being cut off at 60 seconds. And as always, you get bonus points if you begin with "Hello Sophie" and "Successful Guest." I'll be back next week when I'll be joined by the amazing Sarah Ellis, who's the host of the Squiggly Careers podcast and a double best-selling author. I hope you'll join me then. In the meantime, ratings and reviews are really helpful for a brand new project like this. So if you are able to rate, review, or tell a friend, I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you next week, lovely listeners.